Well, in today's session, I am going to provide a bullet point of do nots or don'ts, specifically for men between the age of 18 years up to 35 years, and even beyond. Specifically, my target is 18 to 35, but if you find yourself over 35 and you're still actively dating with no intentions of getting married, then these do nots would also apply. And also for those who are below 18 years, I refer to the three groups as my undergraduates, 18 to 35, postgrad, 35 and above, and preschool, those who are still below 18 years. In any case, I think these list of do nots are very, very important. Now let's get started. The first thing to keep in mind, again, I'm specifically aiming this at people between 18 and 35, although the principle works irrespective of age. I'm speaking to men. I will at some point provide a similar session for women. The principles generally can be inverted, and ladies can apply the same ideas with some subtle modifications. Again, I will provide a separate session for women because I think the principle or the concept of dating should be irrespective of gender, but specifically for men today. Let's begin with dating. The key thing to keep in mind is that dating is like war. Sex is meant to be like war. And the principle I've said before is that all is fair in love and war. The idea of dating for men, specifically between age 18 and 35, is sex. Men go into dates, or go for dates, or go on dates, specifically with the intention of sex. And that simply means between 18 and 35, you should keep in mind that you want to get as much as you can for, or in exchange for as little resources as you can. Women play the opposite game. Women should give out as little as possible in terms of sex and should obtain as much resources as they can. So effectively what you have is something resembling a zero-sum game, which is why I said that dating is like war. And if dating is like war and both parties are trying to get the most for themselves, then all is fair. Number one, between 18 and 35, you should not get married. Between 18 and 35, the principle number one is do not get married. You should only consider marriage from about age 30 and above. Number two, you should not move in with a girlfriend, a partner, a lover, until you are at least 35. And what you find is the two are connected. Don't get married before age 35. You can potentially start considering marriage from age 30. You should not move in with anyone. You should remain single, live alone. You should not move in with someone of the opposite sex in a loving relationship until you are 35. That's the second principle. Number three, and this connects to the first two, 95% of your time should be spent on becoming your best self. Your vision, your purpose, your goals, your dreams, creating financial wealth, financial freedom, focusing on your work and your craft, failing, trying, so that you get to understand who you are as a man. before the relationship comes to the door. 95% of your time should be spent on yourself. 5% should be spent or can be spent on women. 5% of your time equates to roughly about 2.5 hours every week. The rest of your time should be focused on your purpose, on your dreams, on your goals. Now, when I talk about your purpose and your dreams and your goals, and that occurs not in one dimension, it should cover the various aspects of life: physical health, spirituality, emotion, mind space, health and well-being, work, finances. You get to choose, but all of your time should be focused on you becoming the best version of yourself. Now, 5% of your time is dedicated towards women. What that also means is, if you are not going to get married before 35 and you have no intentions of moving in with someone before age 35, and you're dedicating 95% of your time to your craft and 5% to women, you have a limited amount of time for playing around in the dating scene. Now, this leads me to the don'ts, the do-nots during the process of dating. Again, all is fair in love and war. Point number 4. Do not date mothers who are single mothers. Do not date women who are single mothers. In one of the prior sessions, I provided a sketch illustration of the different types of single mothers. I think single mothers are great people. They do an incredible job. This is not a value judgment on who they are as individuals. I'm referring specifically to outcomes for men. The reason you avoid single mothers is simple. And let me just very briefly talk about the different types. You have widows. You have those who are divorced. I call them the widows and the divorced. Type 1. Type 2, you have those who have had children from a marriage that has broken down. In this case, this could be separated or divorced. Number 3, you have single mothers who have had children out of wedlock, to one person, to one father. And that father is no longer in their lives or in the lives of either the mother or the children. And number 4 is you have single mothers who've had children to multiple men. In this case, they have more than one child. Again, we're supposed to look after the orphans and the widows. So I exclude those people from the list. Again, this is not a value judgment on them as an individual. The reason I say ignore and do not date single mothers has to do more with the fact that you will become second place in the relationship. The child will come first, the woman will come second, you come third. Now, you should be number 1 in any relationship. Between 18 and 35, you should be number 1 in any relationship. So I would recommend avoiding single mothers, although sometimes they are perhaps the most easiest if sex is primarily your intention. The risk is too high. The risk to your career, to your future, is way too high. And when I refer to risk, I'm referring to the fact that if I exclude the first type, every other person in that list is a mother, is a single mother, based on a poor error of judgment. In other words, bringing in a child outside the structure of a family and outside the influence and the authority and the presence of a man. So in many ways, my wish for you is effectively just avoid the headache of having to deal with someone else's bastard. Now, A very strong word to use. But let's remember that is a 13th century French word which simply refers to people who have children out of wedlock. Again, the child may be the best thing to the woman, to the mother, and that's great. Between 18 and 35, the last thing you should be looking to be is a father. A father of your own children or a father of someone else's children. Now, if the woman in question has made an error in judgment by keeping the baby, there's a higher likelihood that she will keep the baby should she get pregnant with your seed. And here is the most important thing. You should not be carelessly spreading your seed, because that can derail you from every single thing you're looking to achieve by age 35. Number 5, let's say number 5, do not date women who have dogs or pets. Again, not a judgment on the dog, not a judgment on the woman per se, although implicitly it is. The reason is because pets, especially dogs, are like children. There is no spontaneity in the relationship. You're having to modify your availability to suit her availability based on when the dog can accommodate both you and her. Again, most men or most women get dogs as a substitute for a stable relationship. Dogs are like human beings. Dogs are like babies. As a matter of fact, there are locations and places where you can take a baby to, despite the inconvenience, that you cannot take a dog to. So avoid dating women who have dogs. Because you will come second place. The dog will come first, or rather you will come third place. The dog will come first, she will come second, and you will come third. So avoid women who have dogs as pets. Now this brings me to number 6. Perhaps the most important of everything, and it connects through every single one of the 5 items that I've said so far. Do not get anyone pregnant. Very, very, very important. Over the Christmas period, I cannot say how much I got exposed to errors of omission and commission made by young men, fathering babies that they never intended to be present in their lives. I saw so many people who had kids too young, their careers were derailed too early, they turned out to be very terrible fathers, and unfortunately too young that they were still immature. Your sperm is currency. Protect your sperm with everything you have. And here are some sub-rules. You shouldn't have sex without protection. And condoms are the worst, the least protective form of birth control. Birth control should be primacy in all of your affairs if you're sexually active. You should protect your sperm with everything you have. The corollary to this has to do with the fact that you should not be sexually active with any woman who is not on some form of birth control. Now let me say this so you can understand the importance of this. Women are the gatekeepers to their bodies. They decide who they get sexually active with. They are gatekeepers to their wombs. They decide who they reproduce for. A woman gets to decide who is born in the 21st century. She has the final say. In that regard, she has more rights than a man in the developed West. If a woman decides that she will bring forth life, she can. If a man decides he wants to bring forth life, if the woman is not ready, she can terminate that pregnancy. So women have the ultimate say on who gets born. So you should always keep in mind two things. Condoms are a fail-safe mechanism. They're not the main protective mechanism for reproduction. So if you're not, if you aren't spending time with someone who is not on any form of birth control, you should not have sex with them, because that is in many ways an indication that if something was to happen for some reason and she conceives, she might keep the child. Now, the reason I refer to your sperm being currency is, let me explain this in a very let's say a mathematical way, using numbers. Let me just use some numbers. The average salary in the United Kingdom is about 32,000. If for some reason you decide to ignore this advice and you impregnate a woman, and there's a requirement for you to pay child support, at 32,000 you will be paying roughly about £4,000, assuming 32,000 was your gross annual income. £4,000 is what you would pay in child support minimum for that child. You'll be required to make that payment over an 18-year period. So you will be making 216 payments. If instead that £400 per month was invested in a low-cost index fund, unless you use the S&P 500, and if that every year over a long period of time made roughly 10%, using 18 years as the period in question, by the end of the 18th year, had you invested that money in an investment fund, low-cost index fund, you would have approximately £300,000. That is just over £250,000 between age 18 and 35. So if you made the mistake at 18, by 35 you would have in many ways paid out what we call an annuity. So your sperm is currency. Your sperm is a down payment. It's what we call an annuity. It's the same as, for example, you're a football player and the football club says we'll pay you £10 million per year over the next 10 years, and you sign the contract. When you have sex, unprotected sex, and you get someone pregnant, you are ipso facto saying, I am going to pay you £300,000 over an 18-year period for the mistake I made. Now that is simply one cost that you will incur, and that's just financial. I don't have to go into detail on all the other costs. So one of the don'ts, number 6, is do not, under any circumstances, get anyone pregnant. If you meet someone who is not on birth control, my recommendation is simple. Avoid sex with that person. Now, I don't care if it's your girlfriend. She should be on birth control. Many men make the mistake of saying, well, just before I ejaculate, I'll ensure that I've actually pulled out. The pull-out method does not work. You have to be, forgive me for using this word, idiotic beyond comprehension, to believe that during the process of intercourse, that no sperm leaves your system and goes into the woman's body. As a matter of fact, if any of you have taken time to pleasure yourself or please yourself, you notice sometimes in the process, even before you get to climax, that you're drooling. That is sperm. Those are your swimmers. So the concept that you can, or you believe you can, just before you ejaculate, the idea that you believe that you can pull yourself out fast enough not to make a mistake is idiotic beyond comprehension. You have too much at stake. There is too much at risk. Way too much. Your future, your goals, your dreams, your entire reason for being. The trajectory of your life can be altered by something as temporary as a 2-minute pleasure moment. Now, I've taken much longer time than I wanted just to emphasize that this particular item, number 6, is way too important for you to be casual about it. Again, number 6, do not impregnate anyone. Do not have sex without condoms, even though condoms are not an effective means of protection. They are a fail-safe means of protection. Now, some of you will no doubt say, well, what happens if I meet someone who is a 9 or a 10 in beauty and all I have is a condom? Then here is an alternative recommendation. Just make sure you double up, because depending on how intense you are, there's a possibility that the condom will break. And usually most condoms, often, sometimes, do break. So to minimize the risk, just double up. But my preference is, if she's not on birth control, avoid sex. If she is on birth control, then you should use an additional safe mechanism so that you have 2 forms of birth control going. Very important. Now keep that in mind, because what I'm simply saying is you have too much ahead of you. Most people abort their dreams at a very young age because they make a simple mistake of starting a family before they are ready. And item number 6 is simply to caution you, to encourage you. I wouldn't use the word frighten you, but if I could, I would love to frighten you in recognizing that you have too much at stake. And when I do the session for women, I'm going to elaborate on this, because women pay a higher penalty cost for such a stupid mistake. A man can simply pay £4,000 annually, assuming he earned £32,000, and move on with his life. The woman pays the highest price because she has to raise that child, and therefore the cost to the woman, all things considered, is infinitely much higher. Again, this is not a session for women. I will do a session for women, especially on this particular topic, the dance. But for men, keep in mind, the purpose of dating, the reason for dating primarily, is sex. And most of the time, most conceptions occur because men are trying to have sex, not because men are looking to become fathers, but because they cannot control their loins, they cannot control their emotions, they are not thinking rationally, they have no fail-safe mechanisms in place. Mistakes are made. Those mistakes stay with the men for the rest of their lives, and unfortunately, in many cases, ruin their future potential. Now, number 7. If the purpose of dating is sex, then it means we go out on dates simply for the purpose of acquiring sex. We hope to pay the least amount possible. We hope to get the most amount of sex from multiple partners that we can. So a date is simply an audition from the man to the woman for her to consider him for sexual intercourse. Now, I know this is perhaps maybe not considered to be politically correct, but at the core, men are animals. We're not thinking about, the size of your family, your brother's name, where you studied, what TV shows you like. We don't really care about your political opinions. We don't care much about what type of cuisine you like, where you went to during your last holidays, your previous boyfriends. When we go out on dates, and we endure all that communication, all that small talk, all that pretentious gimmickry for the purpose that we hope that you accept our invitation for sex. And what that simply means is that in order for us to be considered, we have to make ourselves presentable. My advice is simply minimize as many dates as you can. My experience has been, and this is a mistake most men make, and this is where I come to point number 7 or number 8. Guys are deluding themselves into thinking the more they spend, the more they have a likelihood, or the higher the likelihood that they will get sex. In many ways, I can see that perspective, because you make the next person indebted to you, and therefore they have to give something back. My experience, and most women would agree with this, is that if a woman likes you, she doesn't need you to buy her a meal, to buy her clothes, to buy her accessories for her to have sex with you. Most women know within a few seconds, anyway, if they find you attractive. And that simply means all of the ritual of spending money you do not have, or money you should be investing in your investment or retirement account, you're blowing all that funds on meaningless dates. So, point number 7. You should spend as little as possible in order to obtain as much sex as you can. And that simply means there should be a cap on the maximum amount that you spend on a date. There should be a maximum amount you spend on a date. It doesn't matter whether you're considered cheap. Now, my experience has been, and anyone who is older than I am, or younger than I am, but who is who perhaps has at least 10, 15, 20, 30 years in the dating scene would agree to this statement. If you ask the person what they had for dinner on the dates they went to 15 years ago, most people cannot remember. Between age 18 and 35, more than 95% of all the dates, or all the people you date, will amount to nothing. From a long-term perspective, you will not end up as husbands, or as husband and wife. It will simply be a relationship, an encounter, a booty call, or whatever term you choose to use. And that simply means the best thing you can do is recognize that at some point in the future, beyond 35 years, you might be in a serious relationship. You might find a spouse, you might find someone you choose to settle down with. She should be the one who gets to reap all of the hard work of your 18 years of labor. Not the lady you met when you were 20, not the lady you met when you were 22, because in many cases, if you follow my recommendations, you should only be spending 5% of your time on women anyway, between age 18 and 35. So the maximum amount that you should look to spend on a date is £30. If both of you cannot afford to find a place to have a decent meal for £15 each, then something is wrong. As a matter of fact, I'll make some subtle suggestions to this particular dot. But let me just carry on and say this. Picture this scenario. Let's say you go out on a date, or the typical person goes out on a date once or twice every week. And this was my observation over the Christmas period and over the last few months. I couldn't understand how young men, much younger than I am, some still in university or college, are spending upwards of £60 per week on dates, gifts, interactions with women that they have an interest in. I couldn't understand it. But let me paint a picture for you so you can understand how significant this is. £60 per week amounts to roughly £240 per month, depending on the month in question. But in any case, £60, there are 52 weeks in a year. £60 amounts to roughly £3,000 plus annually. Again, £3,000 annually. If that was invested in an investment account, earning 10% per year between age 18 and 35, that would amount to roughly about £200,000. So here is the most important thing you should hear. Let's assume that at age 37, you will be married. Between age 18 and 35, you're playing the field. You're focusing on your dreams. If you spend £60 every single week during 18 and 35 on casual dating for the purpose of sex, by age 35, you would have spent in opportunity cost roughly £200,000. Again, in opportunity cost, because what you're doing is you're trading the opportunity to invest that money, but instead spend the money. On the other hand, if you were wise enough to divert that £60 per week into an investment account, a low-cost index fund, and just let it stay there every week, by age 35, you would have over £200,000, which is more than enough to wine and dine your wife to be. The point here being that the person who should reap the benefits of your labor should be the one who gets to pay the price and who gives you the highest honor. The person who gives you the highest honor is the woman you get married to, not the girl you have sex with, in the bus, under the bus, in the back of the trunk, in your bedroom, behind the car, behind the house. You should focus on the future. So the point I'm making is for you to spend as little as possible, and if you can, safely, through mutual exchange, get as much sex as possible. Now, these are 8 basic, very basic, simple points that I would hope that you would keep in mind. Sometimes we tend to use the benefit of hindsight to say, knowing what I know now, I would have done things differently. There's something called the Quink analysis. Knowing what I know now. KWINK. If I were to take you 18 years forward, assuming you were 18 years, and you heard me explain this do nots, there's a possibility you would say, I wish I'd heard all of this when I was 18, because I could have implemented some of these do nots, or all of these do nots, and this is where I could have been. But here's the key thing. You don't have to look back in regret or with regret. You can now look forward with a plan. I've shared 8 do nots, 8 simple things that you can avoid each of these items do not necessarily require a lot of sacrifice, a lot of planning, a lot of trade-offs. There are some constraints, but the key thing is the constraints are worth the price you're paying, because the choices that you will make would ensure that at age 35 and 36, you haven't made most of the mistakes that most young men unfortunately make.